Okay, guys, welcome back to another edition of Meet the Candidate. And on tonight's program, we have Lahoma Schultz, and she is running in the Tvlse District Seat B. Ms. Schultz, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, Jared, and thank you for doing this for the candidates. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you guys participating. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but I want to remind you guys, if you have a question for Ms. Schultz, just pop it there in the chat and we'll ask it. And since there's no questions in the chat right now, I'm going to go ahead and start with the previously emailed in citizen questions. And the first one of those is, I'm sorry, I forgot. Ms. Schultz, go ahead and take a few minutes and tell us about yourself and why you're running. I forgot about that part. All right, go ahead.
You must be nervous, Jared.
Yeah, I am nervous. I'm always nervous.
Okay, my name is Lahoma Schultz, and and now Jared's got me laughing. But I am of the Panther Clan, and my tribal town is Peach Ground, and my family's ceremonial ground is Arbica. And my church affiliation is All Tribes Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I've been a member of All Tribes for 32 years. And I was actually baptized into Middle Creek Number 1. That's in Dustin, Oklahoma, way back when I was a child. My education is I have an AA degree from Bacone College. I have a Bachelor's of Science from Northeastern State University. I have a master's degree in counseling psychology from Northeastern State University. And I have a PhD from Oklahoma State University. Now, I did mention, I guess I could start with, I was born in Dewar, Oklahoma, which is located in Okmulgee County, because that's where my mom's family was living at the time. And she was living in Oklahoma City, but her mom wanted me to be birthed by midwife. So that's why I was born in Dewar. No hospital. But we were raised in Oklahoma City. I'm the third of 7 children. And my mom and dad were both fluent in Creek. And they were both well-versed in the tribal ways, both the ceremonial ways and the traditional churches. And that's pretty much how they brought us up, even though we lived in Oklahoma City. Dad and mom were very intelligent, and even though their educations were limited, they only both had an 8th grade education, both of them. But Dad had a really good government job that he obtained after World War II. And then mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she was very intelligent in a lot of ways. She was good with finances, and she was good with taking care of a home with 7 kids. But she was also involved, not only, I said, in the church and the ceremonial road, she was a shell shaker. And I always remember that. I loved watching her shake shells. But Dad was also a big-time organizer. He was involved with the Parent Teacher Association. He was involved with coaching Little League Baseball, Little League Basketball. He was also involved with Boy Scouts of America. And a lot of, when he coached, he tried to generate Native guys to play basketball or baseball, because that's just the way he was. He liked to see our Native people involved in community activities. And although we lived in more of a non-Native neighborhood, and our world, mostly day-to-day world, was non-Native, we stayed involved with the Native community. And Dad was actually part of the organizing of the All-Indian softball tournaments in Oklahoma City. And those tournaments were held for decades. So he was one of the guys that helped get those started. So every summer as kids, we had our plans laid out for us. We'd start with Falls Creek, where we interacted with a lot of different tribal young people. Then we would go to the softball tournament, and then we would go to our Mvskoke Wichita convention. And at the time, we used to move around to the different churches in the area, like Montezuma and Okemah, Silver Springs out there on Tiger Mountain, Middle Creek Number 1. So we moved year to year for those meetings. And then after the convention meeting, we would have another softball tournament, but it would be for the women. And then after that, we would have our associational meetings with the Mvskoke Seminole Wichitas. And we do the same thing, go to a different church every year. But now they have a permanent place over at Yardika. And I've only been there one time for one of the meetings since that started. I've heard lots of things. Some people say they like the old ways, but it's been established for so long that it's accepted by most people who don't recall what it was like way back when. So what else can I tell you about Mom and Dad? They started the Glorietta Baptist Church. I hear some folks mention Glorietta. We were one of the charter members, and we started it in the home of Tom and Betty Posey over on the northwest side of Oklahoma City. And most of the members were of the 5 civilized tribes. We had a few Cherokees, but mostly we had Creeks, and we had a few Choctaws, a few Chickasaws, and Seminoles. So we started that church, and it's grown to be a really big church. It's a big establishment there on the southwest side of Oklahoma City. It's been going full force since, what year was that? I think 1964. The early 60s anyway. And then Dad and Mom also helped establish a little mission there in Oklahoma City. We called it the Little Springs Mission. And then that eventually turned into a full-fledged church, which is Victory Christian Church. And that church is still going in Oklahoma City. Well, after Dad retired, he decided to move Mom back to her, closer to her sister who lived in Dewar, Oklahoma. So they got what they called an Indian home in Dewar. And I was still in college when they moved there to Dewar. So I had 2 years living in Dewar, and I finished college. And then I went on to teach high school at the Navajo Reservation, Monument Valley High School, for a year. And then I came back home, back to Oklahoma. But I didn't come back to Okmulgee County. I wanted to be back where I was raised, back in the Oklahoma City area. So I was hired on at the Concho Indian School to teach middle school. And I taught there for 1 year, but that was basically a temporary position. I wanted a full-time, so I went to work eventually for the Bureau of Indian Affairs at the Concho Agency in their real property management department. And I really enjoyed that. But in the middle of all that, I got married. And then I had my first child. And my first child was born with several disabling conditions. So I stopped working to help care for him for the next almost 2 years. And then I became employed with the state of Oklahoma Department of Human Services as a social worker. Now, this child that I had that had all these disabling conditions, because of his conditions and the fact that I couldn't, even though as an employee of the state, could not have him insured because of pre-existing conditions, there was a lot of things that came out of that. One, I was actually asked to come to the state capitol and come down to the floor and talk about the fact that my child couldn't be insured, even though I was working and I had insurance on myself, but I couldn't get this child. So that was an issue with one of the representatives, and she really wanted to pass legislation because there were lots of children that fell into that gap, that couldn't be covered, but the parents were making an income that kept them from being eligible for what SSI, Disabled Children's Program, or any other Social Security programs. So that's kind of where my experience in being involved in legislation began, is with my first child. And then not only did I do that part with the state of Oklahoma, I was taking him to the Oklahoma Health Science Center, what we call Oklahoma, but the Children's Hospital, for all his treatment. And I was asked about being involved in a research program. and they were developing the human growth hormone. They were, the injections that people take now, they take it all for granted. Well, we were on we were at the beginning of that research, and what they were doing was trying to recruit children whose growth, by studying their bone growth, were not going to grow very much. And my child probably at that point was less than 2 feet, and he was already toddling around. So I thought, well, I'm a young mother, I need insurance, and they were giving me all these promises as to his care, and I wouldn't have to pay anything. So I took advantage of that, and I went ahead and signed him up for the research program. And it was very interesting because in the beginning, they actually used the pituitary gland from a recently deceased adult, and they would grind it up and then mix it with chemicals, and that was what was injected into our children. And although my child was small, there were other children that were much smaller. I know one little girl would walk around, and she was maybe 12 inches high, and she would walk around, and it was just unbelievable that she was truly a walking, talking human being, very tiny. But anyway, we got involved in that, and we were involved in that program for at least until they got the FDA approved the drug, and that was in the mid-'80s. So it's another part of me getting involved with the federal government and things that go on with our citizens and their needs. But as a social worker, of course, I was always out and about working with people, other people with disabling conditions, the elders. But in Oklahoma County, I worked there for almost 6 years, and then I moved. I got divorced, and then I had those 2 little ones, and I was raising them and taking care of them. But all my family, my immediate family, was back in Okmulgee County, so I decided to sell my home and move to Henrietta. And I lived there for almost 6 years, and in that period of time, I think that last year, I got married to Bobby Schultz, and Bobby is from Morris. We met through Boy Scouts of America. I was a Webelos leader, the first year that they allowed women to be Webelos leaders. And because my son was at that age, and then we had some kids from Dewar that wanted to be involved. So I was their leader. I was also a social worker. I got a transfer. I didn't say that. I got a transfer from Oklahoma County to Okmulgee County as a social worker. So I was working full time, raising my 2 little kids, getting involved in Boy Scouts, and then it was baseball. And I had my dad as a role model. So I didn't, and I had brothers. I grew up with brothers. So I had no qualms when they needed a baseball coach for the guys, the 9 and 10-year-olds. And I signed up. So I was a baseball coach for a Dewar team. My son was on that team. But I also got involved with the Johnson O'Malley programs because I was a parent, and my dad growing up, he was involved in such things also. So I got involved as an officer there at Dewar, and we lived in Henrietta, but my parents living in Dewar, I enrolled the kids at Dewar, so that's why I was involved with Dewar so much. And then after getting married to Bobby got transferred to Tulsa, and we sold our house in Henrietta, moved to Tulsa, lived in Tulsa for 4 years. And I also I was working on my master's degree, and I got transferred to Tulsa as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And I worked in Tulsa for 9 years as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. So we lived in Tulsa proper for 4 years, and then we chose to move. My daughter went to union schools, and we wanted to keep her in union schools, but we didn't like the area of Tulsa we were living, so we chose to move out to Broken Arrow. And so we sold our house in Tulsa, moved to Broken Arrow, lived there for 7 years. And then in the middle of all that, I get accepted into a PhD program at OSU. And then my dad, of course, sad as it is, he had a stroke. and his wife wasn't caring for him. And then they, so she was wanting to put him in a nursing home. And our traditional ways, we don't put our people in nursing homes. We take care of them at home. Well, I just so happened to have a home that everything was adaptable to what he needed. And so a social worker, the Department of Human Services, and the Adult Protective Services, the Department of Human Services got involved in my dad's care. So anyway, I ended up getting power of attorney over my dad's care. And so we brought him into our home and we took care of him. And he's a big guy, but my son had just got his CNA. My husband was working for the Boy Scouts, and I was going to full-time graduate school, but also working too. But we took Dad in and we took care of him. So at that time, they used to call us the sandwich, I think it was a sandwich society. And that's just that you've got the adult here, you've got your children here, because I still was caring for my daughter. She was still in high school. And then you've got your But that was a lot of work, a lot of legal work, because I had to do all that for my dad and working with attorneys and getting things taken care of for him. And I did a lot of work with the CMS only because of his care. And I learned a lot of what all the ins and outs of the CMS, more so than what I already knew from working as a social worker. And so that helped me a lot. Anyway, eventually I got my PhD, and then Bobby got transferred to Arkansas, and we had to move to Arkansas. We sold our home, moved to Arkansas. And then I was trying to finish up all the things that you have to do for licensing because it's required. And I actually did work at Southern Arkansas University as a professor. I taught there for 2 years. Then I did a mental health community service for almost 2 years. And then I was required to work by the Indian Health Service because they gave me a partial scholarship. I was required to work with Native people, but there were no natives in that area. So I had to move back to Oklahoma. And so I applied at the Veterans Administration in Mvskoke because I knew there would be natives in that area, Native veterans. I got accepted. I bought a home in Mvskoke, went to work at the VA, did some really good work with veterans who were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. As a matter of fact, they presented me with a plaque, and it's from the Oklahoma Military Order of the Purple Heart. And that's something I really cherish. And I've got that on my Elect Lahoma page if anybody's interested. But I did work with them for 2 years, and then the federal government comes in and says, you can't continue to work there. And we went back and forth about the reasonings why, and it's because it didn't matter if I had so many natives on my caseload. That didn't matter. I had to work specifically with the Native tribe or the Indian Health Service. So Bobby and I tried, and he eventually came back to Oklahoma too, and he got promoted to the northwest part of Oklahoma. He was the CEO for that whole area. So he was in contact with some of the tribal entities in that area, and he got in touch with Charlie Primo, who was the health director of the Ponca tribe. And Charlie said, yes.
Ms. Schultz, can I interrupt you just really quickly? The chat is asking us to go on to the questions. They've said that's enough bio.
Well,
are you comfortable with that? Or I'm more than happy to let you finish.
Okay.
But
That's
are you ready to do questions? All right.
I'm fine.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. I'm going to start at the top here. We've had some questions pop up in the chat. T.Y. Prohl's asking, would you support legislation requiring all employees, including those of independent agencies and subcontractors of the nation, to be e-verified to determine citizenship status to be lawfully employed?
I don't know anything about being e-verified. I don't know anything about that. I am familiar with the Contract and Employment Services Act. and they're covered to some extent. But can he explain that to me? What
Well,
he needs for that?
that's a question that came up in a previous thing. E-Verified is a system that the federal government provides for free to see if somebody is lawfully a citizen of the United States, etc.
Okay. Well, if we have that CESO Act, the Contracting and Employment Services Act, and if that was something we needed to add, and if we as legislators need to do that, I would be for it. I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Okay. The next question here is from T.Y. Pearl. He's asking, do you know the citizenship status and nationality of the first non-citizen the Mvskoke Nation prosecuted under the Violence Against Women Act on our reservation?
Do I know the name of the person?
No, the citizenship status and nationality.
No.
Okay. Let's see here. What T.Y. Pearl's asking, what is your position on pretendians and state-recognized wannabe tribes?
Well, I do have a position because in the profession that I'm in, the profession of psychology, I'm involved with the American Psychological Association, and that has been an issue for a few years now. And just in that area of my professional life, and it's really been harmful to our people, especially people who do research and write books and write articles. They may be looked over by somebody who's pretending to be an Indian and can't really prove it, but they nobody questions it until later. And then you've got these professionals who are left out of recognition. It's always important when you're at that level. It's important to get published and to get cited. Mm-hmm. And if you're left out because somebody over here is saying, oh, I'm Indian, I'm Cherokee, my great-great-grandmother was Cherokee, and so they write something up and they get published and they get all these accolades and all, that's taken away from the natives. Now then, if we're thinking about then the global world, Buffy St. Marie, look at all these years people thought she was native, and she was getting all these accolades and all these awards. And maybe someone who was truly native and could prove it, they may have been the one to receive those accolades and those awards.
Mm-hmm.
Because that involves a livelihood. So in both worlds, or both my professional world and the entertainment world, I feel like that natives that truly have to prove their blood have been robbed.
Okay. Well, that goes along with T.Y. Pearl's next question here. He says, do you believe the Indian Arts and Crafts Act is adequately enforced on the reservation to eliminate frauds?
I think when it comes to our the things that we do for our artists, the competitions, and the Cherokees have a festival, we have one, and other people do. I think it's enforced at those levels. And I appreciate that because I can go around, and I love art. I've always loved art. I can go around and I can connect a piece of art to a person that I generally know personally, or I know about their work, and I know who they are, and I know that they truly are native. And I always try to get a story behind the piece of art. So that tells me even more. Even if I don't know the person, if they can share their story and it sounds authentic, I appreciate that.
All right. And I don't see any more questions for right now, so I'm going to move to the email questions. I will let you know that we are at 24 minutes, and we try to do these around 30 minutes. We might go over a few minutes, so I'm going to move through these. Let's move through these questions pretty fast. The first question on my list here is, has the election board or any other governmental body instructed you not to speak about the MCN Supreme Court's decision in the Friedman case?
When we had our first forum at the Okema barn, allergies and menopause, I guess. But anyway, we were told by the facilitator that we couldn't address that issue because one of the participants out in the audience actually got up, and that was the very first question about that case. And the facilitator immediately stopped her and said he was instructed by the chief that we could not talk about that case. Now, that was because they had to be in the process of appealing, because that was on August the 2nd, and the appeal was filed on August the 4th. So they were, I guess, pretty sure they were going to appeal the case. And so it was best that we not talk about it at that time. And no one from the election board has said anything, and no one has confronted me in person, face to face, and said, you can't talk about this.
Okay, and just to clarify, that was at one of the community forums.
Right, it was the Okemah Community Forum.
Okay. So the next question here I wanted to get in real quick before I do this question that's in the chat is, what is your opinion on that decision?
Well, my opinion is that it's a case that people have strong opinions about on both sides. Myself, being aware of our history, being aware of what all tribal entities have had to go through since way back when. Even in 1934, I thought the Indian Reorganization Act kind of wiped all those things out, and we started like with a clean slate. And then these new presidents come along, and we even come to the part where we're almost all terminated, you know? But what our people were doing was they were doing what the federal government was telling them they should do, or strongly advising them that they should do. So very few tribes chose not to have a constitution, but our tribe chose to. And that's what we stand by, because that's what the federal government stands by. And I was surprised that our Supreme Court didn't take more time to do some research and come back with a different decision, because this Constitution that we operate by was approved by the Secretary of the Interior at that time on behalf of the President of the United States in consultation and approval of the Congress. So there's a lot of federal policy in place here. But one thing I do know is that a lower court, including our tribal courts, cannot override federal. So I assume, or I imagine that this case, because they've already exhausted their appeals, the appeal system, that they may have to go to federal court on this.
Okay, so do you agree with the decision, or are you against the decision, just to clarify?
I agree with the Constitution.
Okay, all right. So we've got some questions here in the chat that have popped up. T.Y. Pearl's asking, do you support raising the school clothing donation allocation?
I definitely do.
Oh, okay. T.Y. Pearl's asking, do you support changing the age of eligibility for elder services?
No, I think 55 is good.
All righty. T.Y. Pearl asks, do you support staying the implementation of the Freedman Order until the Graham case is resolved in federal court or the people vote to amend the Constitution?
You know, now the last part, I think that's going to be left up to the federal, that's going to be left up at the federal level. They're going to make the decision eventually. But as far as the stay, now I couldn't find a whole lot about that Graham case. That it's Bigler versus Graham. Is that what you're referencing?
I don't know for sure what I'm not asking the question the chat is, but I think what he's referring to is Ron Graham filed a suit against the Department of the Interior.
It's basically the same, but I couldn't find if it's at the federal level, because if what I'm thinking is we've exhausted our appeals over the other case, the Grayson Kennedy case. I think originally they mentioned the Graham case, but there was also that actual Graham case open.
Yes,
So
I believe.
Depending, sometimes, the appeal is automatic. But in this case, it's not going to be automatic, and I'm thinking they're going to have to request a stay.
Well, currently, right now, the Graham case that T.Y. Pearl's referring to, Ron Graham they asked for a stay last November until the Supreme Court's decision was rendered, and so that they can use whatever the Creek Nation Supreme Court said in their court case. So right now, Ron Graham has a stay that's active in that case. What T.Y. Pearl, I think, is asking you is, would you support the Creek Nation passing legislation for the Creek Nation to make a motion to have a stay until what was the question? Until the people could vote to amend the Constitution?
I would definitely approve a stay. I'm still under the belief that we won't, at this point, we may not have to go to amending the Constitution. It may have to go to federal court and higher.
Okie dokie. I don't see any other questions here, guys. We are at 31 minutes. I have some questions left here, but I'm just going to cherry pick a couple of them that I think are important, and then we'll wrap it up. The first one I wanted to ask is, are you a citizen of any federally recognized tribal town?
No, I am not.
Do you think dual enrollment in a federally recognized tribal town is a conflict of interest?
I've looked at that, and it's very interesting the way the way we work with the tribal towns and the Kealegi, because of that ruling was in 2017, Bigler versus, can't think of the person's name, but the person was a Miko, and he was running for national council, and it was ruled that you couldn't do that. But then I looked into it even further, and the Kealegis, they are a federally recognized tribe, and they aren't allowed the dual citizenship. Now the Alabama Quasatis, it's a different matter. They're a federally recognized tribe, but with that agreement between us, the Mvskoke Creek Nation, and them, they can have dual citizenship. And then you look at the Uchis, and they're not federally recognized, but they're a part of us. And some people see that as dual citizenship, but they do have their own citizenship committee. And of course, the Alabama Quasatis have their own citizenship board, and so does the Kealegi. Is it Kealegi or Kealegi?
It's Kealegi.
Kealegi.
Yeah, Kealegis are is an independent, federally recognized tribe, and so is Alabama Quasati and also Tlaptlaco.
Okay. So I find that interesting. But the only way I would see that there's a conflict of interest is probably like that case from the Kealegis.
Hobaya.
Yeah.
Jeremiah Hobaya. Mm-hmm.
Hobaya case is if they were a officer, and then they also wanted to, try to be national council member. Okay. But then when you look at their constitution further, that's not even allowed at all. So, but I don't have a problem with the others because of the constitutions and how they're set up.
Okie dokie. Let's see here. There's been a question here. I'm going to rephrase the question just because the grammar is a lot, but I think what Vacanza Italian is asking is, would you support passing code or a constitutional amendment to allow same-sex marriage at the Mvskoke Creek Nation?
Well, they're already allowed by the federal government. They're already allowed by the state government. And I believe that came up maybe a year ago with our tribe. And it was, I guess it didn't get out of committee. But according to our Constitution, our people have a right to petition, to have something placed, to go through, to ask for a constitutional amendment, and then it get voted on, that whole process. They have a right to do that. So.
Okay. Well, we are at 35 minutes here, guys. There's one more question from the chat I'm going to ask, and then we'll wrap it up. So T.Y. Pearl's asking, Do treaty tribes have consent authority over non-treaty state and federally recognized tribes in their reservation and historic territory?
That's a convoluted question. Treaty tribes over, you might have to read that again because
Okay.
there's a convoluted question. But
Do treaty tribes have consent authority over non-treaty state and federally recognized tribes in their reservations and historic territory?
they definitely don't over the federal, and I'm not sure about the state,
Okie dokie.
and I can't answer that part.
David is saying I'm ignoring a question. Okay. I think David, I'm going to ask the question I think you're talking about. David Ware is asking, if tribal cannot overrule federal, what does that say for sovereignty?
If tribe cannot overrule,
I think what David is
Oh,
saying,
okay.
I think he's
I think
referring back to the constitutional issue with the freedmen. I think he's saying if the tribe's constitution can't overrule the federal government. Is that the one, David? I saw that you put in there that we were ignoring it, but there's a lot of back and forth in here.
well, because there's a lot of history between us and the United States, going all the way back to when treaties were being made. They quit making treaties in 1871, but going all the way back, the treaties have always been or were government to government, nation to nation. Okay, and in the United States, from the very beginning, recognized the power and influence of our Indian nations within our territory. I wrote out some statements here. So, negotiated treaties and passed laws which acknowledge the special rights and responsibilities of Indian tribes and their members. The laws are a direct result of political agreements between our nations. So, yes, the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Marshall, described tribes as domestic, dependent nations. So we still have our sovereign status. On the other hand, it's limited because, Congress has plenary power over us. And they will have the last say-so over this case.
Okay. All right, guys. T.Y. Pearl's asking a question again. It looks like he's rephrased his question, so I'm going to ask it, and then this will be the last one, guys, because we're at 38 minutes. So T.Y. Pearl's asking, should non-treaty state and federally recognized tribes be subordinate sovereigns to treaty tribes?
You have to say that again.
Should non-treaty state and federally recognized tribes be subordinate sovereigns to treaty tribes?
No one is actually, we're all sovereigns. And definitely, once again, it gets back to my last response. State, that's a different story. Federal, no.
Okay. All right, guys. So we are at about 40 minutes. We went over a little bit, but that's okay. I think we got all the questions that we could get answered. I want to let you guys know that tomorrow we have Elizabeth Ann Gover Miller on at 6 p.m. And then the rest of the schedule is on our Facebook. We posted an updated schedule today. And so if you guys check that out, you can see what's coming up. And we'll see you at the next one. So thanks for tuning in, and thank you for joining us tonight, Ms. Schultz.
Thank you, Jared. I appreciate you.
Sure thing. And you guys, Mado Hadam, Chihichat, Lise.
Same here.